Hello, everyone. Welcome back for this new episode of Coding Design System with George. Hello, George. How are you?
Hello, Mads. What's up?
Yeah, oh, very good. I'm fine. I'm working on a lot of new projects, really cool stuff for all of you, and I'm really excited about it. But they're not finished for any of us, so, so I'm still working on them. But yeah, no, it's a really good time with a lot of good ideas and new things to do. So that's really nice.
Good stuff.
Today we're really excited because I'm pleased to welcome Ryan on stream today for an episode dedicated to SolidJS. Hello, Ryan. How are you?
Hi, glad to be here. A little bit nervous. CSS and this side is an area that I want to learn more about, but I'm not an expert on, so I'm kind of both nervous and excited to be here.
Don't worry. We are between friends here. Don't worry.
Yeah. It will be. It's a really a no pressure thing. We'll just have fun and everything will be nice. So first bit about you. I was really amused when I read your biography, Ryan, because I saw that you started when you were a teenager working on the web and web technologies, and especially just to try to earn some money. And it was exactly what I did with my mom because I bribed my mom, telling her if we have internet at home, I could do a website for your activity. And it was my first try with the web and the web technologies. So I'm really happy to see that I'm not the only one to do this, to do it.
Yeah, I fell into it almost naturally. I was always just kind of technology oriented. So when when I was a kid, I was the one when people were like, my Nintendo is not working, or like what's wrong with my home entertainment system, and like this is all pre-internet. I would just be like fixing stuff around the neighborhood, so to speak, and then when they got the computers and everyone got into computers, I was cleaning people's computers. Um, you know, and when the web kind of took off, it was just like this natural thing where people was like, "Oh, Ryan knows computers," and then next thing I know, I'm building a website for some local kind of out of the house company, and then they tell someone, they're like, "Oh, your website looks good," and I was playing in bands and stuff too at the time, and they needed websites, and next thing I know, I was just making websites for all sorts of people, really, really not good looking websites. I mean, if you've seen spacejam.com, you're like right on the right tone. like this is like table layout kind of thing, but it's I was like 14 or 15, and I there was some cash that I made. Here's $200, make me a website, kind of deal.
Yeah, at some point we all became rich with these new technologies and new stuff.
That's better than selling lemonade, no?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So right now you are working at eBay. Is that it?
Yeah. No, it was interesting. I'm working actually on eBay's JavaScript framework, Marko, which a little bit different than Solid, but there was some similarities. And the guys on the team actually found me through my articles that I was writing about Solid, and they kind of Marko is more of like a MPA framework, like picture something like Astro, but like built from the ground up. So it doesn't like use other frameworks. It's just built from the ground up to do that. Built at eBay like 8 years ago. So it's a very kind of similar model, but it was like built in house. And they realized that a lot of those some of the ideas that I had in Solid wouldn't only apply to performant updates, but actually for even more performant partial hydration. So that's how I ended up there. And we've been working on a new version that improves Marko really across the board, from DX to performance, both for rendering on the server and the client, and for hydration.
This is definitely the future in terms of accelerating performances and rendering, having partial hydration and progressive hydration. This is really what the web is expecting from us.
Yeah, it's really been a lot of fun on both sides, because both frameworks have they have slightly different like philosophies, mentalities of how they approach problems. So I get to really explore both sides. I love looking into all the different technologies, seeing how they work, and not just mechanically how they work, but what it means for the user developing in it. And like we're Solid, which we're going to look at today, is very much on like built from primitives. Everything is explicit. Kind of takes a page from React in terms of like, these are just some building blocks. we'll teach you everything up front. Like we're not hiding anything. We're not trying to necessarily make it easy, but you learn the one page, you know every tool. You might not know how to use every tool right away, but you have all the pieces you need to make an app from fundamentals. To where Marko is more on, say, the Svelte side of things, where it's just like you just use simple expressions, HTML, and the compiler just generates everything for you automatically, right? That's like Marko's hook. It's like picture Svelte, picture Astro, and picture that it can just do what Astro does automatically without you even having to tell it where the islands are. That's kind of like that side. Where personally, as I said, where I came up was on the solid side, which I've always liked control. I've always liked having this explicitness. It's always interesting to me how frameworks come out of different mentalities, like where they were born and where the use case fits, right? As I said, Marko came from an environment that needed server-side rendering. Like that was the whole thing. It's very HTML centric.
eBay has to do.
Exactly. Svelte came up with Rich, making these kind of quick turnaround demos at news media where you had to get onboard people really quickly, build a project, and then ditch it. Solid came out of working at a startup for like a decade. It's like the process of incrementally replacing things and not being out of date with the technology, which is really hard. I would say like Solid tries to keep everything in primitive base because its whole idea is like any part of it could be just swapped out at any time, and that's really what kind of drove it. It wasn't about speed necessarily. It was about having like granular control, the ability to treat every little piece in the most modular way, essentially.
Mm. And what are those pieces on Solid? I know the reactivity, that is a massive point. What are the other modules that can be swapped out?
Yeah, it's part of the reason why we like stuff like JSX and components as well. Because the thing is with Solid is you could just start coding with just the reactive system. Like forget that there's a DOM, forget that there's components. You can literally just, it's a state library essentially at its core, something like MobX, but like you don't need React, you don't need any components. And you could just have it like, I don't know, updating something, alerting you, console logging. Well, all Solid did was take that reactivity and have it render the DOM. There's no like renderer, so to speak. It's just reactive primitives, which we'll see a number of times today, I imagine, updating the DOM. And then from there, JSX was just a natural fit. Instead of having these like, this is the template, this is the component mentality, JSX is very like JavaScript, it's piecewise. And in Solid, our JSX is just DOM elements. So you can just go like const div equals div, and you have a div. Like that's something that JSX really gives you, right? Because when you have these kind of full templating languages, they abstract that piece and they do all the binding and they analyze and they figure it out. And Solid does have smart analysis around the JSX, but the kind of portability there, I feel is a key building block, because people, if you forget about components, if you can forget about like this kind of like what we've been trained on, the component model life cycles and all that stuff, at the core we have a reactive system that writes to the DOM. And if you don't want to write all this imperative DOM code, you can just use JSX. You can literally just go here, JSX is a short form for document create element, and you can just pass it around however you want. The rules are very, very different. And it's hard to explain that without, I guess, seeing it or feeling it. But essentially, we take these levels of small primitives, like these, like our almost hook-like primitives. We take these pieces like JSX, and then components are just functions that run once. They're just a way of you organizing your code. They have no impact really on performance or anything. So essentially, we can just build whatever abstraction we want on top of it. In our case with Solid, our abstraction tends to look like React, but it doesn't have to, right? And that's one of the things. A lot of people have come in and been like, "Oh, it's really cool that you can do this." Some people have created libraries where they literally, you write Svelte essentially and it compiles to Solid, just because it's so easy to take those building blocks and make the framework or library. That distinction is always hard for me. I feel that we're more on the library side. Just do whatever you feel like.
Yeah, I think this is one of the most surprising thing about Solid is to have this mental model, at least, that understand that this is just a function that's going to run once, and it's gonna print or render into your DOM. But then it is actually alive from that point, but there is nothing. I mean, this is after. This is coming up after. It's updating specifically those points where they are reactivity and values, and once you understand that, then yeah, there's a lot that you get after that.
For me personally, it was sort of this understanding, and it didn't come from Solid. Solid was influenced by an earlier library, and there's actually several like it in the early 2010s. KnockoutJS was that it's not just the view, like the DOM representation code that was declarative, but your data can be declarative. The idea that your patterns and behaviors can be basically all written out as rules that can be grouped together. We've all seen this again now because of React hooks and the view composition API and all this stuff. But you have to realize that libraries like Knockout were using this pattern over a decade ago. And for me, at my old startup, we used Knockout, and that's the thing we were piecewising, replacing parts of over the years. And I just loved the pattern so much. And so to the point that when React came out, I was like, yeah, I don't know if I actually need this. We have a better declarative model, I think. But the world kind of moved on. I ended up using React Native for our mobile app. It has a good mobile solution and all that. But generally, I was on this quest to basically update or modernize Knockout.js and this model. And I just built it, around 2016, 2017. I built it, and I was like pretty content with myself. There's some benchmarks, and I was using that as proving ground because a lot of people are like, oh, DOM is slow, VDOM is fast. So I just entered in benchmarks, didn't really think much about it. And then React went and released React hooks. And I was like, wait, people will like this? I always assumed people didn't. I assumed people liked class life cycles, that they liked just plain Pojo objects. I didn't think anyone would ever go for like what we call hooks like syntax. I thought it was
Mm.
like kind of clunky, perhaps, for a lot of people's perspective. I love the pattern, but I thought no one else would. When React showed it and people were excited about it, I was like, oh, people might actually seriously like what I've created here. So I just started writing articles and started promoting it because, I mean, I'm not the only one who saw this. In a certain way, the reactive model is a cleaner version of the hooks model. The second React released hooks, you saw Svelte 3 was designed and came out like within 6 months. Uh, Pretty much, view composition API was announced. Like they all the reactive libraries kind of were hiding their reactivity for some reason, and they finally let it out
Yeah.
once hooks was doing it. And I think this was a huge mind shift for people where they're like, no, we don't want to abstract that way. We want to give people the ability to kind of have this tie into primitives. And I love it because for me, composition is king. That was the secret to how I could keep an old Knockout app feel absolutely modern and up to date and swap things out over a course of a decade, like maintaining the same large single page app. So I'm really happy where things are headed and where the kind of patterns have fallen. And it just turned out Solid was just the right place in the right time.
Yeah. No, it's great. And actually, so yeah, I think a lot of people know Solid for the performance, which are very, very good. And I think I looked at the generated code from the Solid. I don't know if you call it a compiler or transpiler, but I looked at the code, and you can understand that it's pretty much as if the most straightforward way of painting or rendering the DOM right in situ with the reactivity built in.
Yeah.
So I think it's really nice, and that explains the speed. I mean, unless you're ready to write all this thing by hand, manipulating DOM and writing a lot of stuff, you never get that performance, or then your code is not maintainable anymore. You can't maintain that code that Solid writes.
I think that's one of the things that attracts people to Solid. I didn't realize this at first, again, because I was all about, I liked the reactive primitives and I liked the performance, and that was kind of my mentality. But I realized over time, and it kind of relates to, I was talking about people being able to easily take these building blocks and build on top of it. Solid's mental model, like the thing that people come and are attracted to, is that when they look at it and they see it, they go, oh, I could have written this myself, like to a certain degree. Like, In some ways, I think that's why there was less of this, because people were just like, oh, like that's, you can't just build, you need more to build a framework or a render. You don't need, it's not that easy. And the truth is, it isn't. But Solid's compiler does make it look easy, because when you look at it, you're just like, oh yeah, like that maybe that's what I would have written or something. Like it has that feel where it's just like you see just some simple imperative DOM thing, and no one really kind of questions it at most. Once people get a little bit more accustomed past the, like, novice or beginner stage of Solid, most people who use Solid actually understand understand how it works, which is very, as I said, there's contrasting mentalities. That's on the very opposite end of, as I said, Marko or Svelte, where the kind of idea there is you never need to know how the framework works. Like that, it should just, you just write stuff that looks very simple, and then it takes care of it, so that it's completely abstracted from you. You just write let x and then increment it somewhere, and it just works. And you never have to understand that something way more complicated is going on. Or on the Solid side, you see immediately, you're like, oh, there's this reactivity thing. But on the positive side, as I said, there's this feeling or sense that you could have just written it yourself, sort of, so to speak. So like it seems very simple. Like there's nothing really crazy or hidden going on.
No, but interesting. And so obviously we're here to look at a design system in Solid. That will mean it will work in an application in Solid, obviously. But I can see interest in building those components in a design system for performance and reactivity, and that pure reactivity that Solid brings. That's, I think, are the key points. What do we have next, Mads? Do you have more questions, or we should jump in?
I think we could jump in the code directly, because it was really interesting and covered everything I had in mind about Solid. So let's switch to the code side.
I think we could talk about Solid all our evening. I think your morning, Ryan. But
yeah. What's your setup here? It looks like you have the DivRiot's.
This is Backlight. So this is the online studio for writing the design system. We also have a command line version if you want to use VS Code, but like during those streams, we like to go with the online editor. We always learn new things as well on the way. On the left here, if you are not familiar, we have the different components that are packages, and then on each packages you can have the code. And so here, this is what Mads prepared. We have a button in Solid, and you can tell us if it's all right or not. And then we have the stories here, which are stories in the storybook format that we do support as well, and where we render the button of the button that we just created here.
Okay, good. I was going to say, one of the trickiest things sometimes getting set up with tools that maybe there's an expectation that they work like React. Sometimes there's like a little bit of friction getting this set up at first. Obviously, there's the JSX transform that's different than React. And the second thing is, at the render point, we need, because everything in Solid evaluates lazily, we need to wrap it in a function. So sometimes a lot of like storybook type stuff expect you to like basically pass in like the VDOM nodes, and in Solid that doesn't make any sense because there is no virtual DOM. So we actually don't, we need to, the way reactivity works is you need to be able to track it, which means it needs to be in a reactive context, which means you have to wrap everything in a function at the beginning. But it looks like that part, which I was a little concerned with, looks like you have already perfectly set up here. So this works. You click the button.
And nice. I think if I look at the documentation, we probably even support some sort of format directly for Solid.
Yeah, by using a double function.
This didn't work?
Yeah, we could make a try. We had
So
some
let's
issues
see.
with it at some point, but we could make
Let's
just a
try it
simple
again.
test. Let's try it because I updated it recently, so maybe it's working right now.
This is exactly what I was sort of talking about, like
Yeah, the fact of wrapping a function with the status rendering. Yeah.
Yeah, if you have something that works, I'm pretty
That's
stoked to
fine.
just go with it anyway.
This is
But yeah,
perfect. Look,
okay,
this is working.
That's
okay.
perfect.
But yeah, it's one of those things because I said that like there's an expectation of calling like a render function, and then we expect that to be executed underneath our own context, which is why it's a function returning a function. So, but
Yep.
yeah, I've hit this with every storybook like interface that we've ever come across. It's one of those tricky things because a lot of frameworks, or at least the VDOM ones, are driven kind of top down. So you just keep in like the simplest sense, even though they more optimize this, you could just keep on calling render over and over again, and they'll just keep on diffing and changing it. Where, as we've already mentioned, Solid basically kind of runs, sets everything up for you, and then it's watching, and it just knows all the little things that need to update.
Yep. And so,
yeah, I already see some Solid specific stuff in here. Like we don't destructure props because we lose reactivity. So this is one of those tricks to kind of split props that you're doing here. So
okay.
I'm glad you all have clearly read the docs a little bit. So
that's all on Mads.
Yeah, but your documentation is really good. So it wasn't really a big deal to just jump in it and having something working in the editor.
There is one thing that I noticed right off the bat, and this is one of those things you have to kind of think about coming from a render once versus render multiple times perspective. Is it possible that one of these components has an href and then doesn't have an href again? Like, does this chance of it having an href ever change during the course of the component life cycle?
Yeah, we can make it happen. So what we can do is like we can do a button, and then we can do a button with href. Oh, right. I'm on caps. Sorry.
And because one of the things that comes with a framework that runs once is you have to think of it like a function, which means like it has closures and it has its own internal state through that, but it means that any top level return, the other branch will never be hit. So if you look at when you look at the button component here, we return if props ref ternary, return this, otherwise return this. And if that can switch, the solid component will never update because it's not aware. Like it took the first branch, it can never take the second branch. There's a simple fix for this, which is wrap that whole return statement in a JSX fragment, because then essentially it will like know that it's like a dynamic thing that can change. But this is one of there's like two differences from React that come out right away, and those two differences are don't destructure props and don't like do a single return. Don't do a multi or branch return out of a component. So in this, as I said, you can wrap it in a JSX fragment, and it should
like this.
Yeah.
Good.
And then there, and then put the curly braces in it, so it's like a JSX expression, like
this
inside.
Inside, yes.
There, and then inside there, and in that case, we should be fixed. Yeah, there you go. Okay. We have some like built-in control flow components that kind of really spell it out for you, kind of like we have a show component that's like an if statement, and we have like a for component for optimizing loops. These are things that people who use React aren't accustomed to, but it's because it lets us do optimization, and those optimizations matter more to us in Solid because the thing is in React and well anything, if you call like a map function and with new data, it maps over every single element. So if you pretend you're mapping some data to some JSX, every time you update it, you create every JSX nodes for every single item in the list every time, and then you diff it. And JSX and VDOM is relatively cheap, but that's still wasteful. But if it's real DOM, that's actually relatively expensive to remap it every time.
Mm.
So with Solid, we have these helpers built in. You would have those helpers in React if you really wanted to be optimal, but so, because the difference in cost between DOM and BDOM, we just ship with them. If that makes any sense, because it's just like that sort of optimization has a bigger impact. And I think that's one of the biggest shifts or differences when you approach Solid is there's a little the performance.
Where are those? Those are the map array or the index array, or
those are the internals. But can you scroll? There should be a section here about control flow.
control
Yes.
flow? Yeah,
Yes.
I didn't know that.
So like there's an optimized for, and show is the one that actually is similar to what we'd be doing in this button example if you go to the second control flow. But if you look at it, it is just, it's a lot like the suspense component. Like the thing is, at a certain point, if you made your own custom for loop or your own custom like layout component, you're going to be doing this anyways. And I've always valued the composition. That's why I like JSX, right? So if you start writing your app using show and for, and then someone goes, oh, actually, we want to make this an infinite list, or we want to paginate this. For the most part, you might just switch the name of the tag and it still work. You don't have to like introduce a whole different syntax and a whole different way of passing stuff. Like a lot of like single file template things that use like directives or use like handlebars and stuff. When you want to do this type of abstraction, suddenly you're completely rewriting what you're doing. In React, we're used to this kind of component thing, but with Solid, we just skip past like the like map function and just go straight here. Because as I said, like if you've seen error boundaries, you've seen suspense, seen advanced layout components you get from design systems, they're already doing this sort of wrapping anyways. So it just seemed like a good primitive, because this way we can optimize it for you, right? You can use .map in Solid, but and it's fine if you're just doing simple things, but if you're moving the items in the list around, well, then you're going to be creating extra DOM nodes. But yeah, so like that's the for. Obviously, we analyze things like ternary operators so we can optimize them. So you don't like need to use things like show, which is the second one there. But
Yeah.
but we actually find that when you have big blocks of JSX, like when it's not just like simple things, this actually can make it really much more readable, especially if the like fallback or loading state
with the fallback included. Yeah.
it can be a lot smaller. If it's something that's much smaller, you'll find that this way, when you read the JSX, like the thing that gets highlighted is the children of the show. Like you like if you have a big block, instead of trying to go, where's the ant, like where's the
and I think
ternary?
this is very key, because at least you know that within the show you have like the API flow.
Yeah.
And everything that is around it are more about damage control and loading state and stuff. And so if you don't have that, sometimes you may have the fallback before the API flow, or otherwise you're going to have it after. So you never know. And so you have to read more carefully the code. And I guess here you can really quickly understand what is the API flow and what is the fallback. It's always the same way.
I believe you actually get here generally anyways. Once you start making abstractions, once you start making component libraries, you do start, maybe not for show, maybe not for a ternary, but like definitely for collections like lists. And we basically have a handful, but you see this even like error boundaries, suspense, there's a lot of advanced, you see the same pattern over and over again, right?
Yeah. Yeah, this is interesting. And so when you have an error boundary, it means that this failed to render.
Yeah.
It raised an exception, for example.
Yeah, exactly. Like if there's like if during render something throws, it'll catch. It's a little bit fancier than that, because Solid has some async primitives that we use for suspense, and if it can also work if the async thing errors, and then in any template where it's read. So we push errors from like fetching or like promises, not to where the fetching happens, but to where you read the fetched data, and then the UI can handle it through the error boundaries, which is pretty powerful pattern, because then you basically, regardless of where you fetch the data, you know all the places that are affected by reading that data. And we knew that already, because that's how suspense works, because we need to know where to suspend. But it's really powerful both from a client side, but also SSR and isomorphic rendering. We've been doing a lot of really cool experiments recently with streaming, where you could start like streaming the page out, and it's like rendered in the browser partially, and like you're waiting on something, and then that async thing on the server fails, and it actually throws a promise. And because we've already sent half the page to the browser, we actually throw it over the wire, and the browser catches the promise and shows the error boundary. So there's a lot of really powerful stuff you can do with these kind of composable patterns. And as I said, you can even see with the newer components from React, stuff around errors or suspense or whatever. Having control or having components for some of these things actually makes a lot of sense, because you can put a lot of that logic in there instead of pushing it on the end user, and you can optimize for those cases. So I suspect between your design systems you'll be using or building, and between like more orchestration that we see come into frameworks, patterns that get away from like array.map are going to be more and more common.
Mm-hmm. And I think this shows actually how much you care about the developer experience, the DX, and really the compromise about how to use those things pragmatically in real life, which I feel sometimes is not the case for many frameworks, where either they are very fast or very small or very something, but they don't try to be as pragmatic for real life cases and performance and reactive the way Solid is. So it shows, I think, your level of excellence or requirements for Solid.
I hit a lot of this stuff. When I mentioned I wasn't doing CSS to you guys before the show as much in the last like 5 years, but what I was doing was before I worked at eBay, I was basically like a development manager, kind of like the highest. Like, we didn't have a CTO at our company, but I was in charge of all development and engineering at our startup, and I ended up spending a lot of time teaching juniors. We didn't have a lot of money, to be fair. We weren't hiring the newest talent that had maybe the necessary, like the hottest skills. I was teaching a lot of people how to go from jQuery to their first declarative library, and a lot of people who'd never seen React or reactivity or whatnot, and they just knew HTML and CSS and some JavaScript and got them. And I worked really hard to try and eliminate a lot of the foot guns that we hit, because people would just hit this stuff over and over and over again. And after a while, you're just like, like this is actually really detrimental to productivity. And the worst thing is when people don't realize there's an error, and it's not like an error. It's just like something that doesn't work very effectively, and it just ends up in your code. And months later, you're like, or maybe weeks, depends. But people were like, "Why is this so slow?" Or like, "What's going on?" And you're like, "Oh crap! It was re-rendering it over again," or like what I mean, that kind of thing. And it's those kind of hidden expenses that I really wanted to avoid. So a lot of focus on explicit optimization. But I still feel that we can keep the API surface relatively small as long as we focus on like what's fundamental, what those primitives are. So I do leave a lot open, like React does, to the end user space. But I spend a lot of time thinking about what the best building blocks are.
Yeah, you should continue into your mental model. I think it's definitely right. And so to try to progress into our design system a little bit, how do people style today's Solid component? What are the most used techniques today?
Yeah, generally speaking, Solid's fairly unopinionated there, and I said it's probably because I've been fairly unopinionated. It's kind of like React. Generally, people use whatever makes sense for them. Obviously, CSS modules are often very convenient, and I had a lot of experience with that. Because Solid has like basically no real components and lightweight on the component side. A lot of people use Solid with web components, so they can use the shadow DOM to do that. And then like obviously there's the CSS in JS libraries. I made a port of a couple of them. Personally, I've always liked stuff that like the Shadow DOM style, even though I've always liked that ability, like the single file stuff in Vue and Svelte, but with JSX and this kind of portability we have, like that's making a pretty big opinion or statement of how that stuff should work. So I've kind of kept things open. I know the new hotness, so to speak, and people have been talking about are a lot of these libraries that extract the CSS, like vanilla extract. A lot of people that's been a big kind of push release recently in the Solid community, because vanilla extract and its ability to extract stuff out of the runtime and build tool, it fits very well with how people use Solid. Like they're very it feels natural to them, like that you have a tool that's so close to vanilla JS working with a tool that's so close to vanilla CSS to a degree. So there's a lot of opinions, and the truth of the matter, as I said, is I don't feel I'm in the position to tell anyone how they should approach styling. So
no, but at least you're kind of saying that simple, if I can say simple, CSS module fly nicely with Solid, right?
Yeah, and it works really well. It's like Vite and bundlers just have that built in. Then you just don't worry about it very much. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of complicated ways, and I remember I used to build a lot of apps with Rollup, and I'd be like, oh man, why are the CSS tools so poor here compared to Webpack? But I needed to use Rollup because I wanted the smallest bundles and like all that kind of stuff for performance. But some things like CSS modules tend to just work well everywhere. So that's always an option there. We have like style components library, but I had to write something special for that because JSX for Solid is different. But what's nice about CSS modules is you just get this string, and it just works pretty easily. We have some built-in ability to kind of do some dynamic class stuff that can make it pretty convenient here.
Let me try to pick up the solid blue for my button if I found it.
It's also possible that if you go to the about, there's let me see if I can find it, but we have a media side that we actually have like all the images, the logos, that whole thing. I don't see it on the top bar right now, but that's probably because
media.
Yeah, media.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go. Look.
Yeah. People
Very
who are
nice.
working, the people who work on the website are like much more, they know
CSS friendly.
yeah, they and assets and all that stuff. Like I didn't build the website. I would say I had almost nothing to do with the website on that side. I wrote the tutorials, but they built the playground. Like we have a core team now of 6 people, and they do amazing work, which leaves me able to focus on what I like, which is like core reactive mechanics, things that the primitives that I talked about. There's other people who are doing so much great work, not just even the core team, even out in the ecosystem, building plugins, component libraries, that stuff like that, Svelte to Solid style compiler, all that kind of stuff is happening on the outside, and I think it's really amazing to see that kind of growth over the last 6 months since we went 1.0. But very happy because as I said, Solid didn't have a website till 1.0 because I could never find the time to make it. I was like, okay, I could make the website, or I could add concurrent rendering. And honestly, I'd like think to myself, I'm like, which one's easier? And for me, I think concurrent rendering might have actually been the easier thing, the thing that I dreaded less, so to speak, because there's a lot of thought that goes into building websites, right from the design elements, accessibility, responsiveness, mobile. Like there's so much that goes into it. It's I feel like in a sense that side of the problem is more complicated than any like specific engineering problem that I solve.
That is fine. So I'm trying to make this CSS module work. There we go.
There you go.
And so I load the CSS module and I applied the class button on it. And I have my class button. And then I can make color white. And so I have that, and I'm gonna do some. This is how I show off my CSS skills.
It is definitely nice for people, at least who are familiar with React, that generally speaking, the styling part of the experience is similar. It feels actually probably more similar than some of the other elements of Solid. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, in terms of developer experience, it's a really good idea because it really helps to migrate from a React code base to a solid one. If you've got your habits and you know how to deal with basic stuff like JS6 and CSS modules, you can easily work everywhere with a solid code base. So it's really nice.
Yeah, and I found that the funniest thing, or not even funny, it was just kind of interesting, is that Solid, in some sense, because of the need for performance optimization, has a like, not the need, but because of the maybe a need, like just because of a slightly different shift on the primitives, has a few other primitives that aren't maybe found in the core of React, but maybe found in popular libraries, or like because we just kind of went there because we need to do something a little bit more solid specific for it. And I actually had a lot of fun a few weeks ago. I took a Solid app and ported it back to React because I wanted to show off Remix. And it was actually a really surprisingly similar experience because like Remix has it's based on React Router 6 and Solid has a nested router 2. And then Remix had loaders, but Solid's router had data functions, which are very similar. And we were able to just kind of almost port the JSX straight across, except like change a couple things. Like in Solid, we prefer class instead of class name generally, and we prefer like our links have href on them instead of 2. Like little minor cosmetic things. And then it was like swap this used data for swapping this used data, and it was just like it was a surprisingly easy port that I was able to do in short order. I just made a whole Hacker News example and just like moved it over in like 30 minutes or 40 minutes. So it was definitely it's definitely nice to have that kind of familiarity. When things get more complicated, that's where they diverge, right? Solid does not have dependency arrays for. I mean, you can make them explicit if you want, but generally speaking, you don't like put arrays after your create vector or create memo. In Solid, everything's create instead of use because it gets created once instead of reused every time. So there's no dependency arrays. The things auto track, which is kind of can be kind of nice, subtle difference. But generally speaking, yeah, it does feel fairly similar. I guess the other one is there's no use callback or use ref or because those kind of primitives are all based off things rendering over and over and over again. And in our case, a ref can just be a variable, and a call, and there's no need. The use callback doesn't make sense. So it kind of simplifies things because it also means there's a lot of places that you don't need things like React memo is not a thing. Use memo is not a thing. Some people kind of joked after they saw the React forget a video. They're like, which is that new compiler thing they're working on React. Like if you use Solid, like this isn't even a problem. Like you don't need React forget. It just Solid updates that way already. Obviously, if we're going into the mechanics of the compiler, we'd hit that more. But today we're gonna make some nice looking stuff, which is very different than what I usually do, which is make not nice working stuff work really well. Today we're gonna make some nice looking stuff.
So what I did here, what I'm trying to do is here I have, it's not very readable, but I have the RGB code in hexadecimal. And what I want is to build a design token through a CSS variable into a different package here.
I think that's good. I think you're going to like how we handle CSS variables. That was one thing that I'm glad someone pushed me towards. I mean, we could do it with classes too, but our style component, you know how you have like the objects, you pack the style. Our style components in Solid aren't the style object. They're actually an object of like style properties, like native ones, which means that it's possible in Solid to pass CSS variables directly in the style binding, which is kind of cool. I don't know if that'll come up today at all, but
where is that? Where can we see the documentation of that?
Let's see. Is there? If you go, I think it's right down at the bottom because we do a lot of the reactive stuff first. Is there style? Yeah, style.
Style.
So you see how the objects are like is. See, that's the string version. Then underneath there's the object version, and you see how it's background dash color, not background camel case color. But if you look right below it, look at what this means for CSS variables, right?
Yes.
So it's kind of a cool thing. I don't know how like where it fits in. Maybe everyone just switches the stuff with classes anyways. But I thought this was kind of a cool aspect. The reason we did this is it helped unify stuff with with like server side rendering, because then we don't do all these like prop transformations when we're always outputting it, and so it's always the same no matter what. And the other kind of cool benefit of it is, and this is because I know perf, style.set property using this is quicker than setting it the other way. So this gives you a slight performance gain too. So you know,
yeah. And so I'm just trying to see if I can make this work because it looks like I can't. I think that's maybe. No, it's still picking up the old color. That's maybe. That's maybe because he fails to import. I'm on CSS. I'm importing the colors. Colors.css.
You're importing the right CSS modules in the button component because you moved it to SCSS. So maybe
yeah, it's still picking up the old file. We need to clean that, but it's not really changing anything.
There's always the fun part with the build systems. I've been pretty happy with what we've been doing with Vite recently, but at least on the client side. On the server side, Vite's still ironing out some differences between Windows and Linux, but it's always hard with the different build setups and the different tools. There's so many moving pieces. I think it's incredible to see what stuff like you all have been building in the browser. It's like just like a completely different level.
This is running Vite in the browser, actually.
Oh, there you go. So
it's working. It's picking up my red color now, but if I change it live, it doesn't want to pick it up. That's funny, huh?
Yeah.
This is a use case for us, and I don't know exactly why, and I don't know if it's specific to Solid, but we're gonna fix that. But if I refresh,
interesting, because yeah,
are you
under the hood we're using Vite in the browser, and we are using the official Vite plugin for Solid. So right in the browser, so we didn't have to adapt anything. It just worked out.
Interesting. So we think that it's HMR that's breaking this for some reason.
Yeah, probably.
Yes.
So it may be an issue on our side in the migration, the Vite engine to the browser. Maybe we missed some part in the HMR. Maybe. So but we have
but at least we have it. So we have the color, the accent color defined here, and we have the button defined here using the accent color that we load from the colors, and off we go.
Okay.
And we have our stories.
Does the other HMR work too? Like if we change the text of the button, that seems to be okay. I'm just curious. I'm just curious now. Okay.
Yeah.
This works perfectly.
Okay, cool.
So it's probably more in the import of the CSS modules, but
yes, there's something related to CSS.
Yeah, okay.
Because if I change it here right away, It does work. So it
Okay,
is
yeah,
something
yeah.
to do with the import of the CSS.
I'm like looking to figure out what bug I have to fix, but yeah, this looks like it's probably on the Vite side or the whatever setup side, because Solid, like once you're in a CSS file itself, not importing the CSS into the components, Solid doesn't touch that part. So
yeah. So one other question I have for you is that on Backlight, you can write also the documentation of your component. So let me show you an example of that in React. So in React, for example, you can have the button, and then you have the code of the button, and then you have the stories, which are here, very basic. And then you have the documentation. And here the documentation is in MDX. And so this way we can write some documentation and even show some code and put some components inside the documentation, potentially our button, or here in that example, a playground that we built. Do you know about any markdown that can include solid components that exist already?
this is actually one of the newest areas that's been getting work. I don't know if I could guide you in setting that up right at this moment, but in the last month we've had 3 different MDX libraries come out. I literally this has been my whole January, so to speak. The first one came out, and then a week later it was deprecated because the author decided that what the second library author did was better, and then someone else came up with a completely different one which uses a compiler. One of the challenges we have with MDX, again, is because the JSX transform is different, and MDX like assumes you're writing React like completely. So we've had to really it really actually took some clever thinking to do the mapping. We have all the pieces we need to make MDX work. It's just there's certain conventions, and then even like things that plug into MDX. We had some interesting issues where someone was trying to use like an SVG MDX library, and it was generating all the SVG in React camel case stuff, and Solid's SVG uses like the way the DOM works, like with like the exact casing, the dashes where they're dashes, camel case where they're and like people are having to write these custom mappers to map React back to actual HTML and SVG semantics. So the problem is these libraries exist. We just started integrating them like in our doc sites and like that. I have never used them yet, at least with confidence. Some people made PRs, and I merged the PRs and saw that they were working like in our solid start repo. But I'd be doing this pretty blind here. I am not actually.
No, don't worry. I was not planning to start a new integration tonight.
I am pretty excited about it though. Like this was an area that we knew was a hole since 1.0, and when we kicked off, I haven't talked about it yet, but we have a hackathon going on right now. It started January 7th, and essentially there's like $12,000 in prizes and 3 different categories. And this just kind of kicked off a whole bunch of really interesting projects because it's a long running one. We've given people 3 months. We don't want people to feel stressed, but we still want to see some cool projects, right? So, they can work in teams and all that. And out of that, so far, we've been sharing this stuff week to week as it's been kind of coming out. And some of the earliest entries were people like Solid needs MDX. So, I'm pretty stoked about that.
And one option, I mean, we do support Astro for the documentation side. We still need to add some more support. I think we're missing the layout support yet, so this is it's important, but we're gonna support that. And so I think you have a pretty good support in Astro, right, for Solid component.
Yeah, definitely. Astro is great. It made partial hydration like really easy from like just like pick up any framework side. And yeah, Astro's MDX support is great too. So yeah, I think that definitely is a good potential. Actually reminds me, I have to double check some things on the latest version because I might have inadvertently broken Astro in the last minor version, but I got to double check. It's a minor fix, but
that's okay. We don't tell him. We don't tell Fred anything, so don't worry.
Yeah. No, but I had a lot of fun with Astro. I actually did a stream a little while back and actually I hadn't looked at it, and then I realized that the renderer could be optimized, and actually rewrote the renderer on stream for Astro. I think it's a really awesome way to get just be able to pick up and go, here I want a MPA, and that that works for a whole variety of use cases and sites. Like docs here is a perfect use case for that. So I think that's pretty cool.
Exactly. So superb, that's good to know. And probably if you can send us anyway the links to the MDX library, I think we'd be happy to add that into the description of the video for the people interested.
Sure.
Cool.
And
we will add them to the support of Solid right in Backlight too. It will be a less challenging thing to do.
And and we may do something on the hackathon. But talking about supporting Solid, we're running out of time. But before we do, I have a surprise for you, Ryan. I'm gonna stop presenting now, but I'm gonna take this opportunity to actually tell you that we're gonna sponsor Solid.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yes.
Thank you.
So I'm actually opening the tab right now, and if my credit card's gonna work, because it has been like a little bit difficult lately. But let's see. We're gonna do it live. I think it is worthwhile. So SolidJS. You have already 36 backers, and we go for a sponsor. So we're going to be doing $100 a month starting from today.
Thank you so much. This is every bit helps. Right now, we've been collecting money more than we've been spending it. But the truth of the matter is, there's lots of expenses and little things that you just don't even realize when you get into open source. Just you kind of go in there.
I know.
You get in there to kind of just like build something, and the next thing you know, you're like, oh shoot, we have to trademark the name maybe, or like there's a lot of like little legal things, and anyway, so I appreciate that a lot.
So to make proof of it, I'm gonna share my window, because I think it did work. And so here we go. We are a proud sponsor of SolidJS.
Thank you. That's amazing. Thank you so much.
No, it's our pleasure. You're also a great person, a great guy. It's a pleasure to be around with you.
We need a lot of different projects. We need different solutions. We need different frameworks. We need different implementations, because everything can't be run by only one solution, just one framework. We need the diversity. So it's also important for that.
Yeah, I believe in this diversity will bring the right innovation. Super.
Well, thank you very much for being with us today. It was really, really awesome, really interesting to have you and listen to you talking about Solid and the fundamentals of primitives and the future of Solid too. So thank you very much. Talking about Astro, we will have Matthew on live in the few weeks, so we will have an episode dedicated to Astro soon. It will be nice also. And thank you for everything, and see you next week for a next episode.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.